All right, hello everyone. I want to welcome you all to the Practices of Science and Engineering on Your School Campus webinar, looking at how we can use green STEM to meet the next generation science standards. My name is Jeff Chandler, and we've got three really great presenters lined up for you tonight. For those of you who tuned into our webinar a little under a month ago on green engineering in the elementary classroom, welcome back. And for those of you joining an EE Week webinar for the first time, we're glad to have you here. Before we begin, everyone's microphone has been muted to make sure we can hear the presenters clearly. Of course, we still want this to be an interactive webinar and welcome all feedback and questions. We just ask that you contribute through the chat feature on the right. To make a comment or ask a question, simply type into the chat box and click Send. Notice that your comment or question can go either to everyone or you can select a specific recipient. If you are having technical difficulties of any kind, please send your chat to my colleague using the name Neef David, and he will try to help you out. We ask that you address all questions intended for our presenters to Neef Host instead of the specific presenter or the group. This will make it easier for me to collect questions so that our presenters can respond to them later in the Q&A segments of the webinar. This just helps reduce any background noise coming in and helps us make sure we get your question across clearly. We will have time to answer these questions at the end of the whole presentation, but you should feel free to enter questions into the chat box as they come to mind throughout the presentation. Also, just to inform you, there will be a link to a video later on that we're not going to be able to play during the webinar, but we will post later for you to be able to see when you come back to visit the recording. If the slides are appearing slightly too large or too small for your screen, you can adjust the size using the zoom percentage option in the bottom left of your screen. The audio and visual portions of this webinar, as well as a list of links and resources described in the webinar, will be available on our website tomorrow. That bullet point about the audio for computer connections, don't worry about that one. Okay, now that we've got the technical business out of the way, I want to give you a brief introduction to National Environmental Education Week, or EE Week. EE Week 2014's theme is Engineering a Sustainable World, and is being sponsored by Samsung. It will take place April 13th to 19th this year as part of our multi-year focus on greening STEM. Each year we focus in on one of the STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, and math, and look at how developments and teaching practices in that field are being used to enhance environmental education. Today, we'll take a look at why using the natural environment of a schoolyard or nearby outdoor space can provide the perfect setting for a successful green science or engineering lesson. I'm going to quickly introduce our presenters for tonight. Brianna Trigg is the Program Director at Pacific Education Institute, where she works with the natural resource industry, farmers, environmental educators, local and state governments, school districts, and teachers to create opportunities for students to engage and learn outdoors. Her passion for environmental education began as a student at the School of Environmental Studies in Minnesota. Our next presenter will be Pat Otto, who works with PEI as the Project Learning Tree Coordinator for Washington State, providing professional development for teachers throughout the state in environment and sustainability and science education. Pat is one of the authors of PEI's Field Investigation Guide and has been on Washington State's Science Assessment Team for over 10 years. Then we'll hear from Liz White, a Washington State teacher from the Tahoma School District, who has taught science to 4th, 5th, and 6th graders for over 20 years. Currently, she teaches students at Shadow Lake Elementary and has incorporated several of PEI's investigations into her science curriculum. The content of these presentations each build off the previous speaker's slides, and we have a lot of great material to get through, so we'll see if we have some questions after Pat's done presenting, and we may take a couple questions then, but if not, we'll definitely have time for questions at the end. So please enter questions as they come up, and I will then voice them to the presenters when we're done. At this point, I'm excited to hand the presentation over to Brianna so she can tell us a little more about the Pacific Education Institute and give us a better idea of why learning in the outdoors makes such a difference. So Brianna, if you give me a second, I'll pass control to you, and then you'll be able to take it away.
Perfect.
So let's see here. All right, should be all you.
All right, thank you, Jeff, and thanks everybody for joining us tonight. We are very excited to be here with you and to talk to you a little bit about something we're passionate about, which is environmental education. So the Pacific Education Institute, just to give you a little background, our mission is to use the environment as a context, or using the environment as a context, the Pacific Education Institute provides schools and teachers with tools and support to help students become socially and scientifically literate citizens, adept at critical thinking. And basically what this means is that we work with teachers and community partners, natural resource industry, state agencies, to create opportunities for students to get outdoors to do real-world learning. And why do we do environmental education? I think some of the big reasons are, one, that it's local. So students are connecting to the lake that they see down the street, or the tree that they see every morning when they walk out their front door. It's also real. So students are working on projects that have an impact that they can really see. This isn't a worksheet in the classroom, but it's really something that they can come back and say, I planted this tree, or I studied this lake, I know what dissolved oxygen means. It's something that they can look back at with pride. Also, it's meaningful. This is something that's relevant to their lives. They can link to it because it is, again, right outside their front door. And then there's a lot of STEM connections. And I think for us in the environmental field, our job is to take STEM away from the robots and keep it in the natural resources field where it belongs. There are so many places where we can link into science, technology, engineering, and math within environmental education, and we need to keep clarifying those and making them clear to students and teachers. And then the way that Pacific Education Institute works is because we work directly with formal educators in the classroom, we make sure that everything we create meets classroom goals while going outside. So it's never an add-on to the classroom, but it's really, in our opinion, the environment is the best context for learning because it's so exciting. So we link those things with the classroom goals, as you're going to see in the webinar today with the next generation science standards and the science and engineering practices. We make those links for teachers so that they see how this fits into their classroom. A brief overview of some of what we have created. These are all Pacific Education resources that were created with the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, and they're all available free to download on our website. You'll see the web address there, but we can also link that. Today we're going to really be focusing on the project-based learning model when we're talking about engineering, and Pat will go into that a little bit later. In the past, we've done webinars on field investigation and technology. We also have things for how do you create observation skills in young students, schoolyard biodiversity, which is really a field investigation in the schoolyard. Sustainable Tomorrow talks about systems thinking, and landscape investigation really dives into what geography looks like in social studies when you're out in the environment doing hands-on exploration. So we have a number of resources available for people to link into that work for a national audience, and we encourage you to take a look at our website to do a little bit more research on these. Now, to dive into the project-based learning model and learn a little bit more about engineering, I'm going to turn this over to Pat Otto.
Thank you, Brianna, and welcome everybody. I'm Pat Otto from Pacific Education Institute. This is an overview of what the next part of the webinar is going to be. So we're going to do just a quick overview of the next generation science standards framework, both the science and engineering practices and the disciplinary core ideas, particularly engineering design. And then we're going to look at the Pacific Education Institute's project-based learning model and how it reflects those standards and supports the standards in the classroom. Next, we're going to look at Stormwater as an example for doing the project-based learning model, so you can see a real example of going through the steps of that model and what that looks like. And then finally, Liz White from Tahoma School District is going to share what her classroom did with a stormwater project using engineering practices and design. So looking at the next generation science standards, the science and engineering practices, there are 8 steps or 8 parts to that. So asking questions for science and defining problems for engineering, developing and using models, planning and carrying out investigations, analyzing and interpreting data, using mathematics and computational thinking, constructing explanations for science and designing solutions for engineering, engaging in argument from evidence, and obtaining, evaluating, and communicating information. So those are just the steps, and I've put the link in for the Next Generation Framework, and that's an appendix on science and engineering practices. And if you haven't looked at that, that's a wonderful document to get more background on what this means in depth. We're going to focus today on the engineering processes of defining problems, designing solutions, and then looking at obtaining and evaluating how we communicate that information to others to solve those solutions. Now, the Next Generation Science Standards also has what we call cross-cutting standards, and then also has disciplinary core ideas. And in disciplinary core ideas, we have life, earth, and physical, like we usually think of those, and then we have a fourth, which is called engineering design. And again, this has three major parts to it, and again, it has an appendix with the framework for Next Generation Science, which is extremely helpful. But just looking at the parts to engineering design, the first is A, defining and delimiting engineering problems. So this involves stating a problem to be solved and clearly as possible in terms of criteria for success and constraints or limits. B, we're designing solutions to engineering problems. This begins with generating a number of different possible solutions and then evaluating potential solutions to which one best meets your criteria and constraints. And C, optimizing the design solution. So this involves looking at your solutions, systematically testing them and refining them so that your final design uses more trade-offs in what features you want and what features are less important. Again, today we're focusing mainly on A and B, defining those engineering problems and designing solutions. Pacific Education Institute's project-based learning model, and if you've downloaded already, this is on page 4, and this is the steps that you can go through with that model, and you'll see that many of them are represented by our Next Generation standards. We take a step back, though. We ask students to describe the ecosystem that they're going to be investigating and seeing what problems and challenges are in that ecosystem. Then we're going to define the problem. Then we need to research that problem. Then we need to understand the stakeholders. Who cares about that problem? And they'll be very helpful in giving us those criteria and constraints we need. And using those constraints that we have, then we determine possible solutions. From that, we choose a solution and we develop a plan. We implement the plan and then summarize, evaluate, and reflect. Today we're going to use Stormwater as an example of the project-based learning model that supports the student achievement of Next Generation Science Standards and engineering practices and the discipline core ideas, engineering design. So we need to describe the ecosystem. So a typical picture of in front of a school with some planted areas and sidewalks and cars. And I'm not going to ask you to draw and label the components, but I do want you just to think about what are some of the parts of this system. I want you to be starting to think of that schoolyard, that school campus as a system that we want to define. So think of what parts are in this system. So here we've labeled some of the parts, and maybe you've thought of different ones. So we have buildings, cars, sidewalks, decaying leaves, bare ground, bushes, parking lot, air, two different kinds of trees, deciduous and conifers. So those are the basic parts, and we want to just think about that as an urban ecosystem where those parts interact. Now that we've described the ecosystem, and you would certainly have your students do more things like sit spots if anybody does nature mapping, and going out and really understanding the system, the ecosystem outside their doors. And now we're going to define the problem. In this, we've already decided our problem is stormwater, so we're going to learn a little bit about stormwater at this time. Stormwater, or surface water runoff, depending on what book you're reading, you get those two words meaning pretty much the same thing. And we want to think about quantity. So too much surface runoff causes erosion and flooding, and is a problem in our communities. And then the quality. So pollutants from land surfaces being carried by surface water run off into waterways, creeks, streams, river, lakes, and in our area onto Puget Sound. So this is a major problem in our area, and so later when we talk about stakeholders, there's going to be a lot of them. Because Puget Sound, now 70% of the pollution going into our Puget Sound is due to surface water runoff. So this is a huge problem in our area and a very important environmental issue. So defining the problem, there is a video called Stormwater 101, and we've given you a link to that. And this slide also shows you what are the culprits in terms of stormwater runoff. So down in the corner you see the roads are a source of oil and grease, construction dirt, trash, washing onto the road, and then they go to the water body. There's excess fertilizers on our lawns and herbicides. There's also groundwater going into groundwater and surface that can be polluted through groundwater. So all of those things are what we call the culprits, or things that can happen to our lakes and streams, be carried through the stormwater runoff, and affect our waters. When we're looking at that, we want to consider pervious surfaces. And pervious surfaces are those surfaces, which is explained really well in that video. Stormwater soaks in slowly and gets filtered before entering those streams, rivers, and lakes. Impervious surfaces is where stormwater runs off quickly, carrying pollution with it and causing flooding. So obviously, all the impervious surfaces that we now do in our communities causing a problem. And these pictures show you why. So these are two photos from Redondo Beach in Des Moines, Washington, and it is called Des Moines here. And to the left in each of the pictures is Puget Sound, and this is a beach right on the Sound in this upland area. And you can see 1965 is the photo to the left, and 2010 is the photo to the right. And you can see how much more building and impervious surfaces we have in 2010 than we had back just in 1965. You can actually quantify what's going on here by putting a grid over it or putting dots, and actually have percentage of development that's happened in impervious surfaces. And that idea comes from two lessons, either from Project Learning Tree, mapping your community through time, and Project Wild has a lesson called Then and Now. So we have defined our problem as storm water runoff. Now we need to research the problem. So remember back when we drew and labeled, and I didn't have you label, but I had some students draw and label for me. And we first want to look at that impervious and pervious surfaces. So you can see all those pink little cars, and you can see the deciduous trees and the conifers, and you can see the lamps, or the things that look like little mushrooms. All those pervious and impervious on this school campus. To do that, you want to be looking for stormwater runoff problems, which works best to do it after it rains. And so sometimes it's hard to compare before raining and after raining here in the Northwest, because sometimes we have days and days of rain. But students can go out and then they look for the puddles, you look for pollution, those oil slicks on the parking lot, a collection of debris that happens where the water flows, or erosion even happening along the hillsides or underneath where the plants are. And this is adapted from a Project WET activity called Rainy Day Hike. So looking back at our photo that we did earlier, we can now categorize those pervious and impervious surfaces. And then we can even go further again and look at where there might have been problems in terms of puddles, pollution, collection of debris, and erosion in that site, depending how you take your picture or make your drawing. So now that we've researched the problem, we've learned a little bit about stormwater and stormwater runoff, and looked at where the problems might be in our school campus, we need to understand the stakeholders that our students need to address, or take their views into consideration as they try to determine possible solutions. So before considering solutions, we want to understand the constraints, and these stakeholders will be able to give your students some idea of constraints. In selecting a stormwater solution for your school campus, who might the stakeholders in your community be? So just take a minute, jot down a few ideas, think of 3 stakeholders that a stormwater solution project on a school campus might care about that project on your school campus. And we've come up with a few, and I always start with maintenance because they really are have so much to do and are really willing to work with students when they come up with ideas, and they know the ground so well that they'll know where problems are and have them look for problems. The school principal is specific for doing that. The finance office, the local and state government, local businesses, and local environmental groups, and then of course your students. Project-Based Learning Models Guide has student pages for describing stakeholders. So we want to look at this. This gives a template for how students can access and talk to stakeholders and look for information from them. Now we're on to determining possible solutions. Green solutions utilize natural systems. So if we look at green solutions, there are rain gardens, there are plantings. You can just plant trees, that's a great solution. Mulch is very important. They've discovered that using mulch where we do a lot of construction is better than other like the hay you've seen or the netting, that mulch is really preferred. It's really great at helping erosion. There are bioswales, detention ponds, green walls, and green roofs to intercept water. There are also gray solutions, and these are solutions that are constructed. Typical, everyone knows a storm drain that takes our water away, and the pipes that are connected to it. Sometimes these pipes go to combined sewers, sometimes they go to French drains, so sometimes they use both. Using a downspout to get water away from buildings and to more permeable soils. Rain barrels and cisterns for larger rooftops. And then there's also pervious asphalt and concrete. WSU, Washington State University here, is doing a lot of research about pervious asphalt and concrete. Pavers allow the water to soak through rather than just one level of cement or asphalt. A gray and green infrastructure working together is a curb cut with a bioswale, and this would allow the water from a parking lot to go into a green area to have it soak in. Looking at determining possible solutions, we want to evaluate the solution. So I've just chosen 4 of them that we've been looking at: rain gardens, rain barrels, plantings, and pervious surfaces. And you want to look at how you're going, your criteria. So this criteria is across the top, so you could come up with your own. So the amount of water intercepted, the upkeep of any of these solutions, the cost, the safety, educational value, and impact for play areas. You could weight these so certain things have more value or a greater number to get your total score and give it a criteria. Once you've determined your possible solution, sometimes in classes you have several possible solutions, and then you need to pick one and develop a plan. So you need to develop and implement a step-by-step plan, and sometimes you'll have multiple groups having plannings, and then you have to choose from their plans. So here are high school students working with a design on a more technical mapping for their rain gardens. but you can also have student drawings of rain gardens, student drawings of plantings, pervious surfaces to share how these work in their plan. And then we need to implement the plan after we've developed it and chosen a plan that we want to use. So rain garden construction or tree planting are examples of that. For summarizing, evaluate, and reflect, we know students should evaluate their project and reflect how it improves our neighborhood, our city, our school district, our watershed, our Puget Sound in this area, and our world. I'd just like to thank the Stormwater Curriculum developers. One is Nancy Scarrett from the Tahoma School District. She was the assistant superintendent there when we worked on this project. Peter Donaldson is a sustainability ambassador, and he developed the green and gray infrastructure slides and many of the other slides for information. And then me, I also worked on this curriculum, adapting the Pacific Education Institute's project-based learning model and using it for the stormwater curriculum. I've just added a slide for all the references we use so they'd be all in one place. And I'm going to take a couple questions, and then I'm going to turn it over to Liz White, who's a 5th grade teacher from Tahoma School District, and she'll share what her students did after a couple questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Pat. Yep, so as Pat said, if you have a question, feel free to enter it into the chat box, and then I will relay it to Pat or Brianna for their answers before we move on to Liz's part of the presentation. We'll have some time for a couple questions here if people send them through. Maybe just to get started, I'll ask you one so that we can give people a chance to write in or think of questions. I saw students constructing rain barrels or rain gardens there. Does PEI offer resources or links for how to go about actually constructing these, or where to get the materials, or plans for how to implement some of these structures, and after you've discovered some of the places where green and gray infrastructure could be improved?
Yes, there's a great book from our Washington State University about rain gardens. And so that's a wonderful resource online. And there are quite a few. There's a rain garden group that's called 10,000 Rain Gardens in our area to get funds for that. And then also Project Learning Tree has a Green Schools program. And so actually some of the schools in Tahoma got their rain gardens through some funding through them.
Great. We did have a question come in from Janan. Is there any rubric used to assess the work of our students?
Yes, we have several rubrics. Here in Washington State, we actually ask students to go through this process, a similar process without the stakeholders part, on their exams, and so there are rubrics for that within our state.
Great.
So you can look for those, or if you email me, I could send you those as well.
Perfect. Yeah, after this webinar, if anyone wants to email me or any of the presenters, we can pass along and follow up with questions then also. We had another question come in here from Douglas. In the point assessment of projects, the impact to play, do you have experiences that students then spend time and play in these as opportunities for nature play? So I think when you take kids outside to do this project, sometimes they get distracted and maybe play more than they are following the itinerary of the lesson?
I think Liz is our expert on that, and so I'll defer to her as she goes. It's a great segue for her talking about doing this with her students and some of her techniques for keeping them on task. But for my sense of even taking students out to do investigations and things, they often do need time. I call it playing with manipulatives, like when I take students to the beach, that they need some time to be out there before they're ready to collect the data for nature mapping and be consistent about that. So the more time you can go outside, the more invested they are and the more focused they can be, because there's a lot to enjoy out there and they need time to do that as well.
Yeah, that sounds like a good plan, like a good thing to keep in mind. Well,
Okay,
I think that is a good segue into Liz's part of the presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Liz, I think you should still have control, so feel free to take it from here.
All right. Well, I'm really happy. Okay, up here we go. Welcome, everyone, to Engineering Your Environment Towards a Sustainable Future. My name is Liz White, and today my 4th graders and my 5th graders at Shadow Lake Elementary in Maple Valley, Washington, and I would like to share some of our stormwater pollution project-based learning with you. My class and I are experiencing our new Tahoma stormwater curriculum called Engineering Solutions, which Pat assisted with, for the first time, and are midstream in our project as I speak to you today. I welcome your thoughts and ideas for our Spring Showcase project at the end of this webinar. I challenge you to see yourself as a teacher or ambassador of the applications you're about to see. Stormwater pollution touches each one of you, directly or indirectly, and needs our attention. David Suzuki gives us a great quote to start our sharing today. Just as human activity is upsetting Earth's carbon cycle, our actions are altering the water cycle. And so we begin our stormwater project-based journey with this essential question. What is the role of the stormwater engineer, and how does he or she solve problems? To define this problem, my students studied the role of the stormwater engineer as they completed their performance task. While completing the task, students gained an understanding of stormwater pollution and related vocabulary. This task informs about student progress and teaches new concepts, which is a richer learning experience for students. My students felt like they were conducting research as learners rather than feeling like they were completing an assessment, as they studied the video, content, and the authentic job description of a Maple Valley stormwater engineer, complete with salary figures, which really impressed my students. After watching 2 videos and studying the job description of a stormwater engineer, students took notes and responded to questions aligned with Common Core learning targets. One of those questions and responses is shown here. Ultimately, students will complete a piece of writing, although creator Nancy Scarrett continues to refine the parameters of this performance task. Potential solutions begin to arise in students' minds during their work, and you can see that this student also sees other real-world connections to the role of the engineer, like being a creative problem solver or a collaborative worker. You could have heard a pin drop in our room while the students used earbuds with their laptops to review video footage as many times as they needed. What you see here is an excerpt of a kid-friendly glossary my students are building collaboratively in Google Docs to go with the stormwater engineering performance task you just saw. The yellow highlighted parts mean that students believe their definitions are ready to publish, but something's missing at the arrow, and I will soon ask my students, what is a precipitation event? Anyway, we'll continue to edit. We also hope to design a kid-friendly stormwater engineer job description for the performance task. Key here is that in preparing the kid-friendly documents for the future audiences of this task, students are deepening their understanding of stormwater vocabulary and vocabulary related to job description habits of mind behaviors and thinking skills needed in the workplace. Next, we continued to define and research the problem of stormwater pollution. We addressed the essential question, what issues do we face as both a school and local community with stormwater runoff and pollution? I took my students to the City of Maple Valley website and to the Google Docs, although any word processing program would work, to answer defining questions like, what is stormwater? What is a pollutant to stormwater? What are BMP's best management practices, shown at the arrows on this page? Here, students responded to the research questions in complete sentences, worked collaboratively in Google Docs, and practiced their keyboarding skills as they prepared to share their responses with classmates over our document camera. As you can see in Jack and Phoebe's extra credit section, we discovered that our community had conducted a stormwater survey in 2010 to determine the community's general knowledge of stormwater, and that Maple Valley residents can obtain storm drain labeling kits from the city, which the kids found interesting as well. Next, students continued their research as they summarized best management practices using both the City of Maple Valley website and the student-friendly King County BMPs in the stormwater curriculum to create what we called even friendlier BMP pocket guides in collaborative Google Docs. They worked in table groups to weed out the don't do's and to include what homeowners should do with home, automobile, and garden care. Our next essential question: who are the stakeholders in managing stormwater runoff and pollution, and what are their interests? As practice for our Spring Showcase project, we examined the stakeholders of our Spring Native Plants project, which is coming up in a few months. Our initial discussion and notes are shown on this slide. At the arrow, you see that students considered constraints as well as the aesthetic benefits for our principal, Mrs. Everett, who they feel will be most pleased with the plant bed as long as she doesn't have to fork out any money from her school budget. To conclude this part, we still need to interview some of our stakeholders who we feel might be impacted by our possible native plant problem solution and complete a check for understanding of the learning target. I can explain which stakeholders' positions are most and least important and why. Now we use Pat's gray and green infrastructure slide presentation from earlier in the webinar to give gray and green infrastructure understanding to the class. Armed with cameras, the class heads outside and canvasses the outdoor campus. Students can download and classify their photo collections like you see above and present their findings to the class. There's sure to be discussion about pictures that show both gray and green infrastructures and whether gravel over dirt is a gray or green infrastructure. You can assign mini research projects of each of the gray and green infrastructures mentioned in Pat's slide presentation, with a review of the stakeholders of each possible gray or green solution. This research will be really helpful with the Spring Showcase project. This is our Tahoma High School student-designed Stormwater Neighborhood Atlas, funded by a grant from the State Farm Youth Advisory Board. We used it to deepen our understanding of pervious and impervious surfaces in our community and around our school. The Stormwater Atlas shows students where the pervious and impervious surfaces lie in our community, and students can discuss and estimate what percentage of land these surfaces take up, thus initiating a natural class discussion about stormwater impact. Continuing our research, we use the Stormwater Atlas to study the geography and layout of our school campus. Students really connect with these images and maps due to their direct experiences at their school. We label our buildings and key areas to assist with later use of this same version of the map. You could include geography activities here, like finding your school's orientation with compasses and adding a compass rose to the map. Time to go outside to conduct research with our Stormwater Atlas maps and to hunt for gray and green infrastructures. All these photos were taken by students. Equipped with a legend of symbols for storm drains, plants, trees, pipes, students mark each sticky dot with a symbol for the gray or green infrastructure on the Stormwater Atlas maps. It's a great way to assess student understanding of gray and green infrastructures and for students to clarify that a gray infrastructure like pervious concrete, although a green solution, is not a green infrastructure, as students noted on this map. Much opportunity for analysis and critical thinking and review, all practices of an engineer. Here we seek possible solutions with our cameras and atlas maps while rotating turns at mapping, photography, and directing the group work. We take more photos as we search for pollution solutions. Again, some of these photos, well, all of them were taken by students. We study our photos and atlas notes to determine at least 3 possible solutions we might resolve at our school in our showcase project. So which gray or green infrastructure would work best to solve our problem of stormwater pollution in our 3 chosen solution areas? That earlier research of gray and green infrastructures with stakeholder constraints comes in handy right now. Since my class will begin our showcase project later, I'm planning to use this activity with my students shortly as a practice experience for the final steps of the project-based learning model. In 2012, as you can see in this photo, we had a little standing water issue problem with our rain garden, and students assisted in finding solutions. The questions that arose then were, do we need to retest the soil around the campus for a new rain garden site? Do we need to redig the existing rain garden due to a blockage? Or is the water table too high at the base of the hill behind the school? This year's class can relive this experience through the photo collection we have of this past re-engineered project. I can use our visual record as a practice for the steps of determining possible solutions, developing a plan, and sharing how we implemented a plan. This year's class can now summarize, evaluate, and reflect on the re-engineered rain garden plan by visiting the rain garden as it lives today to judge the solution implemented. From the photos, you can see that the plan involved digging deeper into the soil with follow-up drainage testing by students before the rain garden was successfully refilled with soil and our problem was solved. Except for now we have to weed out the rain garden. You've seen how readily technology is incorporated with the project-based learning model. Students know their images will be shared with an authentic audience, that their images are a visual record, a group memory, or visual data for their projects. The visual learner has another avenue to communicate understanding in addition to the written or spoken word. Some of the images are art. Student photos give immediate feedback. Well, with every undertaking there are challenges or opportunities, and we ask, how do I fit this into my already busy day? Well, I suggest you dip your toes and try one activity at a time to start. Once you engage your students, you will see what they can do next, and you can connect your outdoor experiences with other class tasks and content to be even more efficient than I know you already are. The stormwater curriculum I shared with you today can be taught in standalone portions like the stormwater engineering task, over the course of a year with a task in the fall, steps 1 through 5 around mid-year, and steps 6 through 8 in the spring like I'm doing this year, or as a 3-week intensive study that culminates with an action project such as a recommendation to your school board or a community group for a showcase project. Feeling burdened and overwhelmed with content to teach for the Common Core? Well, you are Common Core aligned with your stormwater pollution project-based learning at all times, with so many connections and standards addressed. No worries. Stormwater pollution terminology feels uncomfortable to new learners at all age levels at first, including the teacher. Allow yourself and students time to revisit the terminology with various strategies like the GLAD Cognitive Content Dictionary, spelling lists, vocabulary practice, puzzles, quizzes, whatever repetition helps the terms stick. Connect with your community and parent volunteers and engage them with small student groups outside while you process with indoor groups, or you join your groups outside as well. If your area is enclosed, students can walk to a supervised area, take photos and collect data, and return within a time limit. It's amazing how students have a sense of the start of recess or lunchtime, and they return to class right on time. The earlier question about keeping students focused, if you set it up with a short time frame outside, it does help with the focus, but they also do need some time to just enjoy their outdoors. Short and frequent outdoor sessions keep your students focused and allow time to process outdoor discoveries when they return to class. Short sessions with class debriefing also allow you to adjust for the next outing. You can probably tell that I love to get cameras into the hands of my students. The camera is your record of student participation and focus and supports data collection on paper. Let the camera also aid in classroom management as it records student behavior and collaboration or lack thereof, and let it be a student's art medium or a way to speak to you. Let the camera engage your learners. Assign student roles outdoors, recorder, photographer 1 and 2 if you can get 2 cameras for each group, a reporter of findings upon return to class, and an assistant to the recorder while outdoors. Rotate these roles each time you go outside. Download student photos to share on the big screen as small groups report their findings. Everyone has a job to do with each outing, and students know they will have a turn at each job. Bad weather? Hello? Well, I'm going to keep going. Bad weather? Tackle indoor environmental concerns if you can't get outdoors. Try a waste recycling audit of your classroom, or begin a lunchtime composting plan for your class or the school. Make a plan to reduce paper use in your classroom, or figure ways to reuse copies in your classroom. There are many smaller or larger classroom or school-related problems to which the project-based learning model can be applied. For differentiation or as a class collaborative venture, here are a few ideas for your highly engaged learners. We all have some of them. You could design a best management practices family pocket guide. Another idea, you could use Google Forms or SurveyMonkey to design a stormwater survey for classroom families before and after your study to see how sharing at home has impacted your families. You could also have students design a gray and green infrastructure scavenger hunt to which groups find photo evidence from around their campus as responses. The list goes on, and I bet you have some ideas. The student learning benefits are immense, and my list here is incomplete. We live in a world of gray and green infrastructures which both create and solve problems in our great outdoors. It's my wish for each of you to begin to envision your own outdoor engineering solutions in whatever your backyard is. See yourself problem solving and collaborating with students, colleagues, family, or your community, and realize that a problem you and those around you can solve, however big or small, is waiting right outside your door. So go open your door after our question and answer session, though, and really look. I have a feeling you will start to ask questions, and so begins your project-based journey. And so to wrap up, I'd like to share another David Suzuki quote that urges us towards engineering outdoor solutions with our students when he says, ultimately, we need to recognize that while humans continue to build urban landscapes, we share these spaces with other species. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today and tonight.
Thanks,
Jeff,
Liz.
back to you.
All right, perfect. That was great. That was wonderful. I particularly liked the student-generated glossary of terms. I think that's a great idea. It would really help teaching and understanding year to year. Well done there.
And the repetition with the vocabulary again. It gives them practice.
Right. Well, we did have a question come in from Gail, so we'll start with that, but definitely feel free, anyone else, to submit your questions through the chat box again. And at this point, we can open it up to any of the 3 presenters, whoever feels like they can answer it the best. So send in any questions you have related to tonight's topic. We'll start. This question comes from Gail, and you may have touched on it a little bit, but if you could talk a little bit more about whether or not the students in the classes have the opportunity to carry out water quality testing themselves, and how that works.
I haven't if you're asking me, I haven't personally done this with the students. I'm just kind of dabbling my feet with this, dipping my toes in, so to speak, and practicing the project-based learning model with the students. But maybe Pat can speak to that. I bet she has.
I've been working in Seattle School District on a project. They have a Solutions and Pollutions, which is a a kit, one of their science kits, and they've extended it to the outdoors. And so many other students besides Seattle are working on water quality and using that as part of their project-based learning model, whether it's to clean up an area and then they can test their solution by doing that water quality in their pond, seeing if removing invasives and checking both water quality through other parameters, but oftentimes macroinvertebrates are used to look at that water quality. So those are great things to be using, to be testing those solutions and seeing where you're at in terms of your lakes, rivers, and streams.
Great. So anyone feel free to submit questions, but I guess I'll ask another one until we get one from the audience. I'm thinking that maybe one thing that could make a teacher hesitant whether or not they want to actually undertake a stormwater solutions investigation with their class could be that they're not sure whether a location they pick will be as perfect for this investigation as the parking lot you showed, with the nice balance between green and gray infrastructure. Are there some signs you look for or standard places you have in mind that really tend to work well for this sort of investigation time after time?
Well, for my situation, I would recommend, again, getting the kids just to get outside and to look, to see, to have them begin to ask questions after they have some background. And they may notice things that the adults have not noticed. That's what I've come to find. And that could be a starting point. Again, you don't have to have a beautifully manicured parking lot with plants and all that in place to get started. Pat, what would you add?
And sometimes when you're thinking about that permeability, we have a lot of lawns that aren't very permeable, so you can actually investigate doing percolation studies. What on your campus, may be less permeable. You may have a big lawn, you may have a soccer field that gets puddles, and so you could solve those problems in terms of that permeability by adding plantings or not necessarily just a rain garden, but other plantings might help, or mulch, or attending it to divert those waters. So lots of opportunities.
Yeah, our students actually did the soil testing at our school to determine the best site for the rain garden. And so it doesn't have to be just for the rain garden like Pat said, but they loved it. They loved that experience. Out there digging, they had to dig deep too, and our soil is quite loamy, so it was quite a workout.
Great. We did have another question come in from Gail, actually, for you, Liz, asking if you had any local experts or local agencies come in to talk with the class about the solutions they had in mind, or planning, or some of the engineering possibilities they were thinking about.
Well, that is something with our stakeholders. I'd like to get started with that next. We are only partway through the process, as I mentioned in the webinar. In fact, I told Pat and Brianna when I was invited, I'm just a newbie with this, I'm still learning with the kids. So no, I have not gotten to that, but I am thinking that's in my plan. We have had Peter Donaldson in to speak with the kids last year, but this year that's still on my radar. So I highly recommend it.
Okay, well, Liz, we really appreciate, even though you're sort of just testing out this investigation, we really appreciate you kind of running through what's worked and challenges you've run into. I think it really helps to hear from someone who's in the process. So, thank you. So I think I'm not seeing any more questions come in, but if you think of one after the webinar or later tonight, feel free to email one of us. I'll have my email up at the end of the presentation, and then I can pass it along to our presenters, and we can try to get an answer back to you. But thank you, Liz, Brianna, and Pat, for your presentations. That was great and really insightful. You've done a great job, and we really appreciate the time you took to walk us through some of the great work you're doing.
Thank you.
I'm going to take control back.
And thanks, everyone, for joining.
Yeah. I'm going to take control back so I can walk through some of the final slides here. We got there, but that's okay. I want to remind everyone that the video and audio recording of this webinar will be archived on our website at eeweek.org/webinars, along with a PDF version of the slide presentation. So please check back sometime tomorrow for that, and feel free to pass the link along to anyone else you think might be interested. Also keep in mind our other upcoming webinars. Here. We have leading up to EE Week 2014. Now that you have all registered for EE Week, you have access to all future webinars and will not need to register again. We will post details about the March 12th webinar soon. While visiting the archived webinar on our newly redesigned website, please browse around the site to see what new features and resources we've been adding, and stay tuned as we continue to replenish the pages with new blog posts, toolkits, graphics, and updates about EE Week 2014. The most recent blog post is actually from Brianna, so you'll definitely want to check that out to learn more about taking the classroom outside. I also wanted to bring up this slide again to remind people that PEI has produced a number of great resource guides that are available from their website. We will post a link to these resources on the webinar page of our website, so you can follow that and look through some of these great guides. So once again, thank you everyone who tuned into our webinar tonight, and thank you again to our presenters. My contact information is on the screen now if anyone has any follow-up questions or comments about the webinar. I'd be happy to answer any questions about EE Week or pass along any further questions to our presenters. Also, please visit pacificeducationinstitute.org for more information related to today's topic. I will be sending out a survey and an email tomorrow, along with a link to the archived webinar recording and related materials. We'd really appreciate it if you took a minute to answer the few quick questions sometime in the next few days so that we can continue to improve our webinar series leading up to EE Week. So thanks again, everyone. I hope you all have a great night.